So really quickly before we get into the Arnolfini wedding portrait, I just wanted to show you the rest of the Annunciation triptych, or the Maroad Altarpiece by Robert Campen. So this is the total picture. And when we were in class, I talked a little bit about the side that shows you the patrons looking in on this moment happening, in which Mary gets an announcement from the angel letting her know that she is going to be with child. And then here on the side, you have Joseph in his wood shop working as a carpenter. So that's just to show you, to illustrate the point of what we were talking about in class last time. So now we're going to talk about the Arnolfini portrait. And there's going to be 2 videos in this series broken up into 15 minutes. You can watch the first one whenever, and then watch the second one as you want. But just wanted you to know that there are 2 videos. This just has to do with, I'm having issues with Screencast-O-Matic. So I have to break these up into 2 because 15 minutes is all they're letting me have right now. But suffice to say, let's get started. So this is one of the most famous pieces of Northern Renaissance art. And we talked about this piece last time in class a little bit at the end. We showed a video on it. And there's a lot of controversy surrounding what exactly this piece means. So I wanted to go into that a little bit more in depth. And I'm going to show you a few things. The first of which is, how do we know that this is Arnolfini? So one of the reasons why this is identified as being Arnolfini is because of this later portrait, which we know to be Giovanni Arnolfini, that was created by Jan van Eyck in 1438. And if you look at the face of this individual and then the face of this individual here, you'll note that they are very similar. So that's just one of the ways that this has been identified. So the name Arnolfini became attached to this paintings, to the painting based on also the records of its previous owners. So this is one way in which we learn about what a painting means and who it is of, is based on what is called the provenance. And it was originally owned by Don Diego de Guevara, who was an important collector. And then he gave that painting to Margaret of Austria in 1516. So in 2 separate inventories in her collection, this is where the name Arnolfini first comes up. So the Arnolfini family were merchants, very similar to the Medici and other Italian families. And they built their wealth on the trade of luxury fabrics, and were originally from the city of Lucca in Italy. So there were 2 cousins from the same Arnolfini family that could have been one of the people pictured in the Arnolfini portrait. So originally the painting was thought to be a painting of Giovanni Arnolfini and his wife, Jean de Sonami. However, it was discovered in the 1990s that Arnolfini and de Sonami didn't wed until 1447, which was actually 13 years after the portrait was completed. So now it's believed that the Arnolfini portrait depicts the former cousin, Giovanni de Niccolao, in Arnolfini. So and his wife, Costanza Trenta. So this original idea that was had by Edwin Panofsky was that this portrait was of a merchant and his wife, and that it was meant to be a witness to the marriage. However, one of the problems with this is that as we discovered that this is not the Arnolfini that we thought, and that the wife who it was thought to be originally, that they didn't marry until after the painting was created, and discovering that it's this other cousin, also Giovanni Arnolfini, we discover also that Trenta, Costanza Trenta, died in 1433 in childbirth. So since this was a year prior to the date that's signed on the painting, this has led many people to speculate about exactly who this woman could be. So Edwin Panofsky wrote an article called Jan van Eyck's Arnolfini Portrait. And this was one of the first analysis of the painting, and it became very widely accepted for a long time. And this is one of the reasons why this portrait is often referred to as the Arnolfini wedding portrait. So we talked a little bit about this already, but basically Panofsky made the claim that this image is of a wedding ceremony between Giovanni Arnolfini and, he originally thought, Jean de Sonamy. However, in her essay titled The Arnolfini Double Portrait, A Simple Solution, art historian Margaret Coster suggested that it was instead just a memorial portrait for the wife of Giovanni Niccolao Arnolfini, who had died, his wife had died the year previous. So Panofsky's article was published the original article was published in March of 1934. And the newest evidence of what happened with this portrait is, as we said, from the 1990s. So he didn't have access to the information that was available. And so he was basing his opinion based on what was currently understood. So one of the main parts of this analysis, Panofsky's analysis, was focused on the hands of the couple. And the joining of hands is a gesture that, since ancient Roman reliefs in which a man and woman held their hands together in a union, that it was associated with marriage. And marriage during the Renaissance wasn't the same kind of entity or the same kind of thing as it is today. You didn't necessarily have to have a priest present to officiate the marriage, or even have witnesses, as long as there was a mutual agreement between the two persons. So instead, Coster suggests that the hand-holding signifies the husband still clinging on to his deceased wife, and as her life slips away. And in Coster's interpretation, there's a gargoyle next to her hand, which also signifies the couple's doom. The dog and the floor also raises a little bit of debate as meaning inside the Arnolfini portrait. For Panofsky, the dog represents fidelity. So usually this is interpreted, Renaissance paintings with dogs in them are meant to be like an idea of domesticated sexuality. So the animal itself represents the animal nature of human beings, while the tameness of the dog, in comparison, is meant to be something that points to the domestic nature of this sort of love. And they're seen as signs of that marital fidelity and loyalty. So Coster suggests that dogs are seen on female tombs from ancient times, and they were believed to guard and guide them into the afterlife. So this was Coster's explanation for why the dog stands closest to the woman, representing her death. To say that there's also the interpretation that some have suggested that this dog was just something that wealthy young women would have around them as a result of how to explain the presence of fleas. So having the dog there kind of gave you an excuse, very similar to blaming smells or something like that on a dog. This is another possible interpretation. So the other reason why Panofsky thought that this might be a marriage contract, like a literal marriage contract, is because of the presence of Jan van Eyck's signature. And it says basically Jan van Eyck was here. So according to Panofsky, this was seen as a literal marriage certificate, as Van Eyck signed the image with his name and the date. And it is also above the mirror, which you see a reflection which supposedly shows the image of Van Eyck, and as well as another person or witness to this contract. So the mirror is another clue that Coster claims to support her arguments. And the mirror is associated with scenes from the Passion of the Christ. So each of the scenes here around is a depiction of one of the scenes of the Passion. And she notes that the scenes of the death and resurrection, so here, are located on the side of the female, while the right side contains images of Christ's life next to the male. And by observing it through this perspective, it's seen as another confirmation that it was intended as a memorial of the woman featured. And then lastly, of course, we see in the chandelier that the candle on the man's side is lit, while the candle on the woman's side has burnt out. Someone like Panofsky would argue that this candle represented a lighting of, say, a unity candle to ask for the blessing of the Holy Spirit on the wedding. So the point of all this and talking about this is that there are multiple interpretations by people who are experts that can change over time as a result of having access to better information. And so when we look back at something that comes out of the past, one of the things that we need to make sure that we do is to interpret that based on not just opinion and analysis, but evidence. So this is one of the reasons why, as we go through, we may talk about what we can see and describe, and images as we have access to a common understanding. So we know that, for instance, if we're looking at an open table with one man in the middle and 6 men on either side of him, that's likely a portrait of the Last Supper. But we need to understand these things have a historical context that we need to know in order to interpret correctly. And that even over time, even the experts get it wrong. So Panofsky was an expert on the Northern Renaissance, and his methods and his methodology for interpreting is still used widely today. But he was very, very famously wrong about this portrait. And we've got a little bit more that we're going to talk about in the next video regarding this. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.